This is Steve Jobs, and this is how he turned a billion-dollar loss into a $309 million profit in just 1 year. When he returned, Apple was 90 days from bankruptcy, drowning in 70 different products with no focus. So, he killed 70% of them. Then he created one simple, powerful strategy: make only winning products.
Today, I'm showing you exactly how to build it. We're going to build the entire blueprint, node by node. We'll break down the methodology behind constructing a cohesive 3D environment and directing a multi-camera scene. Now, this is a massive project. So, to make it easier for you to follow, I'm breaking this into 3 parts. Each video will stay under 30 minutes, because let's be honest, nobody wants to sit through a 1-hour tutorial. But before we dive in, I want to acknowledge another powerful approach to creation, brought to you by today's sponsor, FlexClip.
What we're about to do in DaVinci Resolve is powerful, but let's be honest, it's also time-consuming and has a steep learning curve. But often you just need a video done fast. That's what FlexClip is for. It's an all-in-one online video creator that works right in your browser. But here's where it gets incredible. Its AI video generator can recreate an existing template into a brand new video. Its AI video generator can create a whole video for you from a single line of text. It can even generate images, create realistic voiceovers with text-to-speech. The best part? It's all incredibly intuitive. No complex settings, no confusing interface. And to prove how easy it is, this entire ad you're watching right now was made completely inside FlexClip. To help you get started, FlexClip has given me an incredible gift for my community. I have 10 free business accounts to give away. To claim one, be one of the first 10 people to register using my exclusive link in the description. It's a massive thank you for supporting this channel. Let's start with our main character, Steve Jobs. I'm adding my previous final edit to follow the same timing we established, and now we're incorporating Steve Jobs into the complete workflow. First thing you'll notice, I want to move the animation to the right, but my image is cut off. Here's the professional fix. I'm adding a transform node and simply pressing the flip image button. Now we're going to create that cinematic professional blur that you see in high-end productions. For this, I'm using a variable blur node. Watch this transformation. I'm increasing the blur size to maximum and cranking up the quality to get that buttery smooth result. Here's where we add character to our image. I'm dropping in a grain node because authentic film grain separates professional work from amateur attempts. In the settings, I'm increasing both the power section and grain size. But here's the crucial part most people miss. To make the grain effect only affect the dark colors, I'm swapping to spread and changing the graph output to 0. Look at this before and after. That's the difference between generic digital and cinematic quality. Time for some advanced masking work. We need a polygon mask to isolate his eyes. I'm drawing a rectangle around the eye area and hitting the invert button. Now for the stroke line, here's a pro technique. I'm copying the polygon mask and pressing Ctrl-Shift-V to paste it as an instance. I'm adding a background node and linking the background output to the grain output. This creates a merge node automatically. Changing the color to white reveals an issue. The background ratio doesn't match our image ratio. Here's the fix. Swap to the image section, uncheck auto resolution, and enter the exact same numbers as your main image. Now I'm selecting the instance polygon, right-clicking in the inspector to invert it, and pressing de-instance to unlink it from the original. I'm making the same for solid, and the border width. Then, uncheck the invert and solid options, and adjust border width until the thickness matches what we need. For the animation, and this is where it gets exciting, I'm removing any existing keyframes from the shape. Going to frame 40, I'm adding 1 keyframe.
Then back to the first frame, I'm selecting all points of the mask, right-clicking, choosing polygon, then shape box, or Shift+B. Now I'm changing the shape to make it disappear completely. We now have a smooth reveal animation that builds tension perfectly.
Let's add some interactive elements. I'm dragging a cursor image to the workspace and connecting it to the output of the merge node. Selecting the cursor image, I'm adding a transform node. First, I'm decreasing the size to fit our vision. Going to frame 40, where our mask animation ends, I'm positioning the cursor at the last point and hitting the keyframe for center. Back to the first frame. I'm changing the position to follow the animation path. Now selecting both the transform node and mask node where we created our animations, I'm opening the spline editor to smooth everything out. I'm using OutCubic for that professional ease.
Well, that's the result we have now, but notice how the cursor image stops at frame 40. I'm adding another transform node and keyframing the center. Then around frame 80, I'm changing the position again.
To make this feel more realistic, I'm selecting the keyframes in the viewer and reshaping the curve to be more natural than a straight line. In the spline editor, I'm selecting all keyframes and pressing S to smooth everything. Professional workflow tip. I'm selecting all our Steve Jobs nodes and adding an underlay node. In the inspector, I can change the name and color for better organization. This might seem small, but when you're working on complex projects, organization saves hours of frustration. Now we're entering the real magic, 3D space. We need 3 essential nodes: Image Plane 3D, Camera 3D, and Render 3D. I'm connecting the render output to the media output. Using the Image Plane 3D, I'm adjusting the Z position to bring our image into view. I want the middle of the eyeglasses positioned in the center of the screen. This creates perfect focal balance.
For the text in the page margin, I will use the previous nodes from my modification because it is just text to improve the appearance without any animation, only the text node with Image Planner 3D.
To make our node organization even more customized, I'm using a second Merge 3D node. You could use the same Merge 3D node, but I prefer keeping text nodes separate from other elements for better workflow management. For our background, I'm adding a background node to the workspace.
Then add a new Image Plane 3D, connect it to the 3D Merge node, and now go to the inspector and reduce the Z position to push it all the way back. To change the color, select the background node and change it from a solid color to 4 corners and create a gradient with light gray and dark gray. This step is entirely up to your creative vision, but gradients always look more professional than flat colors. Next step, adding new text plus node for his name in Workspace and connect it to the output of Merge node. Now write the name Steve Jobs. Okay, now, for the font, I'm using Dharma Gothic C, which has that clean, tech industry feel. Now go to Layout section to change the position. I prefer showing the name in the right bottom of the screen for better composition balance. Now let's swapping to Shading tab and changing the type of color from solid to gradient, then swapping the black for purple. This creates visual interest and brand consistency.
Now for the animation magic. Back in the text section, I'm right-clicking and choosing Follower. In the Modifier tab, I'm increasing the delay value. Swapping to the Transform tab, I'm changing the transform from character to words and putting a keyframe for offset at frame 30. Back to frame 0, I'm decreasing the Y value. Now we have smooth animation from bottom to top. For the opacity effect, I'm swapping to the Shading tab, decreasing opacity all the way to 0 and adding a keyframe. I'm also increasing both X and Y softness values to maximum and keyframing each one. At the same keyframe from Transform, I'm increasing opacity and decreasing softness values. In the spline graph, I'm selecting all keyframes and pressing S to smooth them.
For the circle surrounding the text, I select the text as well as the node and click on the paint icon to add a paint node. Now I drag it to the viewer to improve visibility, then select the polygon icon from the top bar and add 4 points as I do. Next, I select all the points, then click on the smooth icon to get a perfect circular shape. In the inspector, under Brush Controls, I select the Hard Shape option and reduce the size to suit our view. Remember that you can modify this circle as you wish by adjusting the key points and changing the colors.
For animation, going to the frame where the first word shows up, I'm opening Stroke Control, adding a keyframe for Right On, and dragging the slider left. A couple of frames later, I'm dragging it right again. In the spline graph, I'm making it smooth.
Now watch the result of the first scene, then we'll move on to the most important part of this video. Instead of using hard cuts, I'm teaching you the professional multi-camera technique. So now, selecting the render node, and first I'm setting the render type to hardware, then changing the camera to match our first camera name. It's Camera 3D1. Now time to adding a second camera to the workspace. I could connect this to our existing Merge 3D node, but I want the camera separate, so I'm adding a second Merge node and connecting the camera nodes to it. For multi-camera work, we need multiple render nodes. I'm copying the render node and pasting it, connecting the 3D merge node to the input, then connecting both render outputs together. This creates a merge node automatically. For the second render node in the inspector, I'm changing the camera to match our second camera name. Critical point. The second render node must be in the foreground, so I'm swapping inputs by pressing Ctrl+T. Here's the professional trick. I'm selecting the second render node and setting the value to the exact frame where I want the second shot to start. Frame 45 in my case. Now all I need to do is adjust the second camera to get the exact result I want. Yes, you must be in the timeline after frame 45 to see the changed result, now that you have finished setting up the second camera. At this point, I don't like where Steve Jobs appears, so I'm removing the merge node and adding an image plane 3D, then adjust the sitting to get the exact positioning you want. Ops. I forgot to add the zoom out at the beginning. Let me fix that. Selecting the first camera node, I'm adding a Transform 3D node. In the first frame, I'm decreasing the Z translation value, then going to frame 46 and returning the value to 0. In the spline graph, following my curve, so starting fast and ending slow for that cinematic feel.
So next, for the next text, I'm using the same nodes as before, copying the 3 nodes and pasting them. For the paint node, I'm resetting it to create another shape. Using the image plane 3D, I'm changing the position values to center it on screen. For the text, I'm rewriting the words, changing the font, decreasing line space and tracking for better readability, changing the anchor to start both lines from the left, and using the layout options to perfect the positioning. For colors, I'm swapping to shading and changing white to black for better contrast. For the line shape, I'm selecting the paint node and dragging it to the viewer. In the upper bar, I'm selecting the polygon icon and drawing the line. In brush controls, I'm changing from soft to stroke and decreasing the size. Going to the line, I'm reshaping it to add some curves, and changing the color to black as well. Now, for animation, I'm going to frame 48 around the couple's frame after the start of the second scene. Now decreasing the right on value and putting a keyframe. A couple of frames later, I'm returning it back. Quick trip to the spline editor to smooth everything out. For text animation, I'm opening the keyframe tab, selecting the keyframes, and making the animation start before we transition to the next camera, starting around frame 40. Before moving on to the result, let's select all the nodes related to text and add an undernode to organize them. So here's a preview of what we've done so far. Okay, let's add one more text element. Adding a new Text Plus node and a new Image Plane 3D, connect it to the 3D Merge node, then select the Text Plus node again and type in the new text. Then using the Image Plane 3D to position it perfectly.
Then go back to the Text Plus node and change the font. If you want, return to Image Plane 3D to change the position as well. After that, as Text Plus node, selected Swap to the Shading tab, and I change the color type to Gradient. For me, I use light purple on both the right and left sliders, then dark purple in the middle. Also, I can adjust the angle of the assignment to get the perfect result for me.
When end setup, I want to add a glow effect to this text, so I'm using a glow node from the NEO package. This package includes many helpful nodes, and you can get it with a 10% discount using my affiliate link below. Now, for animation, go to the frame that matches your voice. I'm going to the Shading tab, decreasing opacity to 0, keyframing it, increasing X and Y softness to maximum, keyframing those, then going a couple of frames forward and returning the values. As usual, in the spline editor, I'm making the animation smooth. For the long line, I simply add a background to the workspace, then Image Plane 3D, and connect it to the 3D Merge node. In Image Plane 3D, I reduce the Z offset to push it back, then increase the X position to ensure it starts in the right place. Now add a polygon mask, and dragging the background node to the viewer, in middle of the screen, draw a line, and modify the graph to create some circular shapes. In Inspector, deselecting the solid option and increasing the size slightly. OK that it return to Media Out and adjust the position using Image Plane 3D to place it below the last text by using the Y transition value. And for me, I want to get a thinner line, so you can go to the polygon mask and reduce the border width to get the right size. So now, select this 3 nodes and add a underlay node for organization and rename it appropriately.
I want to move right, but the line would go below screen level, and I don't want that. I want it centered. For this, I need a third camera using the same method as before, adding the camera to workspace, connecting it to the camera 3D merge node, copying the render node and pasting it, connecting the 3D merge node to input. In render settings, I'm changing the camera to match our third camera name, connecting the output with the merge node output, making sure this new render is in the foreground, then selecting the render and starting this at frame 75. Going to the third camera, I'm changing the transition value to ensure the line stays centered on screen. For line animation, around frame 65, I'm selecting the polygon mask, decreasing length to 0, keyframing it, then going 20 frames forward and increasing it to 1, smoothing the animation in the spline editor. To create smooth transitions between the second and third scenes, I'm adding a 3D transform node after the second camera. At frame 70, I'm putting a keyframe for X transition, going to frame 80 and increasing the value slightly. As usual, into the spline editor to smooth the animation. And here is the result now. Time for new text. Dragging a new text to workspace with a new Image Plane 3D, connecting it to the 3D merge. In the text box, I'm writing our text and changing the font to ink-free. Using the Image Plane 3D, I'm positioning the text above the line. With the Text Plus node selected, I'm changing color to black and decreasing tracking. For this text, I'm using a Dent node to create a circular effect. In the Dent node, I'm changing the type to Dent 2 and decreasing the strength. It's a subtle change, but it feels more professional. For the highlight box, I'm adding a background node, connecting output to the Dent node output, then adding a rectangle mask to the mask input, changing color to purple and dragging the merge node to viewer for better visibility, fixing the rectangle mask to highlight just under the word billion, adding some rotation for visual interest. Returning media to viewer and starting animation. I need a new rectangle mask connected to the first mask. Changing width and height to 1, selecting the first node and changing paint mode to minimum. Selecting the big mask again, changing center all the way left. Going to the frame where I want to start, keyframing it, syncing with voice. Then, a couple frames later, returning the value to 0.5, smoothing in the spline editor. And here is the result. Now for text animation, selecting the text plus node and go to inspector sitting, and right-clicking in text section, now choosing follower and swapping to modifier tab. Here we want to increasing delay value and going to shading tab to decreasing opacity to 0 and out a keyframe. Then a couple frames later, increase the value to 1 and in spline smoothing it. So, we got this? Okay. Now time to add the money hand. I downloaded an image from the internet and added it to Workspace. To remove the green background, I'm adding a chroma key node and selecting the green screen to make all background disappear. Take your time here to get the perfect result. I want this in black and white, so I'm adding a color corrector and dragging saturation all the way down to 0. Also, decreasing lift slightly to make it darker. So to converting to 3D space by adding Image Plane 3D and connecting to 3D Merge node. Adding an underlay node for organization, naming it Money, and changing color. Now selecting Image Plane 3D and customizing settings to get the right placement. After you finish that, time to animation, so I want to use Z rotation, but notice the rotation starts from the middle of the hand. We don't want that. So, using the pivot Y point to make animation start from the bottom of the hand. Now, going to frame 46 where second scene starts. Increasing rotation Z value to make money disappear under Steve's image. Keyframing, then around frame 90 returning value to 0, smoothing and spline as usual. It looks good, but I want to make it more professional. Since I can't use camera focus due to my low-end PC, I'm using a simple trick without a Gaussian blur node. Now going to where animation starts and in Inspector keyframing the strengthened C, then a couple frames later decreasing the value, not to 0, to make it feel still back but getting closer. Okay, I forgot to add the word loss. So I copy Steve Jobs' text node and the paint node as well, paste them into the workspace, connect them to the merge node output, change the position using the new merge node to fit the right place on the screen. Then change the color of the paint node, and if you want, draw another shape, or change the appearance of the circle to get a different look. For the text shape, first change it to loss, then change the font, and go to the Shading tab to change the color to solid red. Then go back to the text section to change the size, and in the Layout section, change the position. For the animation part, go to the frame where you want it to start appearing, and in the Reference Frame tab, select both the text node and the paint node, then select the All Key Frames and drag them to the same reference frame. Now the result looks good, but the circle seems too slow depending on the animation of the text here, so I select the last keyframe of the polygonal mask animation and make it closer to a faster timing. Now, the result looks better. Moving to the next section, I want to move to the right. So, select the third camera node and add a Transform 3D node. Go to frame 78 to add a keyframe to the X transition. Then go to frame 130, change the value to get the correct section, and the text will disappear. Okay, the line looks short, so selecting the Image Plane 3D controlling the line, I'm increasing size to fit the full screen. To make it thinner, selecting Polygon Mask and decreasing border width. Then go back to Image Plane 3D to fix the height where I want it to be under the turned world. Now, if you notice in this section that the line is not in the middle of the screen, the line is slightly lower at the end, so select the last 3D transformation we added and go to the same frame where the animation starts, set the keyframe for the Z rotation, and then in the last frame, change the Z value to make the line straight. I can also add keyframes for the Y transition. Change the value to the last frame to make sure the line is still in the middle of the screen. I want the money to disappear, so I move the objects in 3D space when the camera quickly approaches objects far from the camera, so we need to select the plane 3D image and make it closer with the same overall width, so do that and then go back. Don't forget to make the animation curved rather than linear. To do this, open the spline, select all the keyframes, press S to smooth. This changed the graph from linear to sine wave. Okay. That looks better. For the next text, the process is the same as before, so I copy all the keyframes and in Image Plane 3D, I adjust the position as needed. Then I go and change the text color, paint color, and shape. Then I change the timing according to your voice, which is why I speed up this part. Now for the money element at the top of the screen. This uses the identical process I showed you earlier with the hand money animation. Same workflow, just different positioning and timing. Rather than repeating the exact same steps, apply what you learned from the hand money section here. For the last text, there's a slight difference. Copying nodes from previous text. We don't need profit anymore. Connecting to merge node output creates new merge node. And now, changing the text. For the change effect, I need to add a transparent node, adding background and connecting to merge node output, making sure it's in background input. In Inspector, decreasing alpha all the way to 0. If you want to understand why we do this step, let me know in the comment section and I'll explain merge nodes in a quick short video. Now we move to the frame where we want the text to disappear. Then we go back to the previous 2 frames. Set the frame key to 1. Then go back and lower the value to 0. For second text, use the animation keyframe by changing timing with keyframe tab. And that's it. Now we have a zooming in effect. It's simple. I use another transform node. I prefer using separate transform nodes for each animation, making keyframe for Z transition where text animation starts appearing, then going to last frame and decreasing the value, going to spline and smoothing animation as usual. For the cylinder, it's the same as money, so I'll skip this section. And that's it for part 1. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.